If I had to describe myself as a child, looking back, I would say I was very curious and I loved to imagine things and then bring those imagined things into reality. At the time, electronics was really like the cool technology. This idea of communicating at a distance was very attractive. When I was doing the ham radio in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn, New York, there are certain rules and there's certain frequency bands that you have to operate on. I was tuning it and I started transmitting a general call. It was called CQ, where you call for somebody to talk to you. But I was transmitting outside the band that I should be transmitting on. The consequence of that was I got a letter from the FCC saying you were off the band, and you've got to write a letter back to us explaining us, because this is a federal crime. I heard my mother and my father talking, and my father simply couldn't understand how his kid could get in trouble with the federal authorities in Idaho. I was being disruptive, but in a way that he wasn't used to getting letters from the federal government about something you did halfway across the country. So we sent the letter back and it was fine, but I remember that was the first time that I felt my parents didn't know what to do with me. I would say that in the professional world, when I became an engineer, I was disruptive to some extent because I was proposing new things. But it didn't seem disruptive to me, it seemed more natural because I had spent most of my childhood doing these kinds of things. I was doing things that weren't really normal things to do, but because I had a vision about what could be there, I wanted to try to do that. When I came to Kodak, our role in the research lab was to look at new forms of imaging, and I fit really well into that environment. When you're in one discipline, like I was electronics, I was very interested in electronics and I knew a lot about it. I didn't know much about mechanical work. And mechanical work was really, the primary engineer was at Kodak at that time because cameras were mechanical marvels. To control film advance and exposure and shutter, they required elegant mechanical designs that started 100 years ago. So these things had matured, and so mechanical engineers were like magic to me in a sense. I could not do any of this stuff, right? And so I said, well, let's eliminate all mechanical complexity because I can't do any of it, and I'll try to build a camera with no moving parts at all. It never occurred to me that I was at odds with the fundamental mission of the company for the last 100 years. It really didn't. It's going back to having a vision of how something could work and trying to implement it. By me describing a digital camera, that made the concept seem more distant because the technology of digital was esoteric, expensive, unusual. Not many people understood it. There were no consumer products. I was proposing that this would eventually someday in the distant future become a consumer product. We went to Yellowstone as a family vacation. It was in 1998 that we were there. And if you go there, you go to Old Faithful, and that Old Faithful erupts periodically every 30 minutes or so. And I was sitting there with my wife, Cindy, and I looked around and I saw everybody getting their camera ready for the big moment. And I noticed that there were film cameras, there were digital cameras, there were, well, still video floppy cameras, which was a hybrid approach to it. And they were all getting ready. And I remember saying to Cindy, it's happening. I think it's critical for us to make progress with every generation challenging the assumptions of the previous generation. I think that's the way you make progress. And you have to enable instruments to do that. You have to create environments to do that. That's what the Camp Invention is about. That's what CIC is about. And you're enabling with help, with motivation, modeling the way, leading, in a sense, the younger generation or the new people to start looking at things differently so that we can make a difference, so something changes, okay? Because without change, you just stay still. And then all of a sudden, you start thinking about things that aren't necessarily going to get you any better. I think what happens is you go through your life and you make your contribution, and then you realize your contribution has meaning and it's very personally satisfying to you. And then all of a sudden you realize, for whatever reason, I'm somehow an ambassador now for the innovative process.